Welcome back to my channel. My name is Akiba. I am a certified teacher turned homeschool mother, and today we're going to be talking about something that's on everyone's mind, which is should they homeschool their child or should they participate in distant learning with their public or private school. And I wanted just to quickly run down the pros and cons of both for people who may be new to homeschooling and are still trying to make a decision. So first and foremost, I want you to relax. Even though the school year is about to get started, you have plenty of time because either way, you can always switch. So if you're starting the year in public school or private school and you're doing distant learning and you're just like, this is not working out, you can easily unenroll your child and enroll them into the homeschooling program. No matter what the website says or what you hear from other people, like, oh, it's going to take weeks and weeks, you just stop sending your child to school and start instructing them and sending in the paperwork. I've never heard of anybody having an issue with that. On the flip side, if you do decide to homeschool and then you're like, this just is not working out, I can't do this or I don't want to do this, then you simply enroll your child in a public or private school, as long as there are slots open, obviously, in the private school. So take your time, relax. Whatever your child is signed up for now, that's fine. Listen, watch this video, and then make your decision. All right, so let's talk through these options and find out which is going to be best for you and your child. So let's talk about curriculum. Obviously, in homeschooling, you choose your own curriculum. You have to go through that process of figuring out what you're going to use to teach your child. Now, there's lots of different types of ways people homeschool. Some people use workbooks and they just have their child work through workbooks. Other people are really hands-on and they want to find projects. People like me, I'm a teacher, so I love to use teacher created resources and also actual publisher curriculum. And some people kind of unschool, so they don't use any sort of set curriculum. They just do whatever the child wants to do for that day. So that being said, homeschool, you do have to make a decision and you have to decide what your child is going to learn and how you're going to teach them. On the flip side, if you are distant learning, your school is going to be responsible for giving you all of the materials, whether that's a packet that they just work through for a couple weeks, or that's meeting online every day with the teacher and having a face-to-face working through the curriculum, but that will be provided for you. Now with that, obviously the teacher is going to be teaching in distant learning, and so they're going to be the ones ultimately responsible. For homeschooling, you're going to be the one responsible for teaching your child and making sure they get those objectives in. So let's talk about how that learning process is going to occur. Now, it really depends on your school district or school, how the learning will happen. I have seen a lot of different programs. I've seen public schools, private schools, I've seen charter schools, I've seen everything on these teacher forums online. And honestly, the worst that I've seen is not just giving a kid a packet and having them work through that. The worst I've seen is the majority of what's going to happen, and that's your child is on the computer from 8 a.m. to 2 or 3 p.m. doing a Zoom class or a Google Meet with their teacher. I think that's completely inappropriate for any grade level. On the flip side, I've seen private schools where they are having the kids on some Zoom lessons, they're doing interactive stuff, they're sending out work packets and activities for the children. So they're only on the computer for about an hour or two a day, and that works out just fine for them. On the flip side, homeschool positive is you can choose whatever schedule you'd like. You don't have to say, I've got to be home at 10 a.m. because my child has their Zoom class. Since you're working from home, most likely, you're going to want that flexibility. So I really, really love that with homeschool, you set your own schedule and your kid doesn't have to be on the computer at a certain time for a certain amount of hours. The next thing is grades and report cards, things like that. When you are distant learning, that's going to be provided for you. I really think this is a negative because what I've seen is that children are taking a while to adjust to online learning. And I saw a lot of kids who are doing excellent in school, like straight A students, when they went to distant learning, they're getting B's and C's and D's because they weren't able to make that adjustment so quickly in the midst of a pandemic. And I really think it's a shame, and shame on the principal and the teachers and the school districts who are allowing this to happen. I feel like there should have been either no grade for that semester, or everyone in the US gets a pass, or whatever it may be, as long as they attempted to show up for the class. And this can really affect you if your child, for example, is an upcoming middle schooler or upcoming high schooler, or an upcoming college student, because they may be trying to get into a school which requires good grades. And if they've got straight A's and then 1 year it's like they're flunking, maybe people will say, okay, there was COVID, or maybe they'll look at your child and say, oh, well, they're irresponsible and they won't get into whatever program they're trying to get into. With homeschooling comes some responsibility, and I think this is the kicker for a lot of people, is that you do, depending on your state, have to report to someone. Now, some states are very lax and they're just like, you just tell us you're homeschooling and that's it. We don't need to know anything else. Some states want to see that your child is doing regular instruction, and that can vary. So, for example, in Maryland, when I was up at the homeschool review, they told me, well, regular instruction could be they're getting math every day, could be they're getting math every week, could be they're getting a 3-hour session of math every month. It's not really specific language, so it was very easy. There are other states, I know, like New York, people complain a lot because they want to see stuff in more detail. California, it depends on what option you choose. So there's a bunch of different options, and you can choose an option where you really don't have to meet with anyone from the state, and you can do it all yourself. There's another option which is like you making yourself a private school or a charter school, and so then you have other teachers come out and review your work, or do a video call, or just do a phone call. And that really depends on what school you choose, if that school is lax or not. So there's a ton of different options here that depend on your state, and also can depend on what options you choose within your state. Oh, and I'll also say the review, especially for homeschool last year, at least for the state of Maryland, was like, here's an affidavit, sign off that you taught your child this year. And I signed the affidavit, and that was it. So you really never know what might happen with these homeschool reviews. Whereas with sending your child to a school, you need to really talk with the principal and the teacher very closely to say, what are the expectations, and how will I know that my child is going to receive like an A or a B or good grades in this school? Because some might have a policy like, as long as your child shows up and is attending and is turning in their work, they're going to get an A. So really have that conversation with principals and the other school leaders about that before you just make a decision. Now I'm about to tell you guys the real. Sometimes people in the homeschooling communities, especially in states where they're really strict, and I understand that homeschooling is a right that people have to fight for, and I can't even imagine having to fight for the right to teach my own child, especially when education in this country is so terrible. But anyway, if you look on the forums, or if you're in groups, it can seem overwhelming, and it can seem like there's a lot of reporting and stuff that you're going to have to do. Now, I'm coming to you as a public school teacher who's telling you stuff that other people are not going to tell you. You don't have to do any of that. I myself didn't do any of that. I faked it completely and 100% faked it. And not because there wasn't work done. When I homeschooled my child, we did a ton of work. That's why my 4-year-old knows how to read fluently on a 3rd grade level. But I'm not keeping all these records and like having her do all these worksheets and stuff like that just to give it to you, to prove it to you, because I was a public school teacher, I know that what they're asking of homeschool parents is more than they're requiring of the public school teachers. As a public school teacher, do you know how many documents we were told to fake? For example, 1 year I was a teacher in a certain grade, and there was a substitute and like a crazy teacher, like all this stuff going on with the other class. So my vice principal came to me and said, look, a lot went on with this class this semester, and it wasn't only this class, it was other classes too. They never had a secure teacher, their teachers were unqualified. I need you to do their report cards and give everyone in the class a B. Things like that happen legitimately all of the time. There are times where we're doing our report cards, we're told maybe a couple days before, oh, we need portfolios for every single student, gather portfolios. And we're like, what? You never said anything about portfolios. And now we're like telling the students, here's a packet of work, write these dates on your papers, write your name on it, and do the work in different color pens. because the state is coming and they're going to review your portfolios. So the fact that the state is requiring all of this from homeschool parents, to me it's like, whatever. I'm going to make the portfolio in the beginning of the year, make up some stuff, keep it in a binder for you to look at. And then I'm going to actually teach my child and not worry about that. So don't not homeschool because you feel like the requirements of what you need to show are too strict. Okay, moving on from that, another plus about distant learning is that your child stays with their class. They're able to get on those Google Hangouts and Meets and Zoom Meet with their friends. So they're able to have a little bit of social interaction even though it is online. Now with homeschooling, we normally do social stuff in like homeschool pods, so the kids are very well socialized. Here it's going to take you extra effort to enroll your child into other distant learning type things, like maybe distant Girl Scouts, which my daughter was in this past year, things like that, so they can get that social interaction. So it's going to take an extra step. Now, I'm not sure if this is a plus or minus. It depends on your own preference, but with distant learning, if the school year progresses and let's say January, there's a vaccine and everything is safe, you can send your child back to school. For homeschooling, it's very easy to unenroll them out of homeschooling and put them back into the public school system. Now, one major negative of enrolling your child, I think just in school in general, I've heard several of these stories right now, one out of Ohio, where a child tested positive for COVID-19. The teacher and like 14 other students had to self-quarantine now for 14 days. So that's terrible. When you have COVID or when you're suspected to have COVID, you're supposed to stay in your house. You're not even supposed to really open your windows. That's what my doctor told me when I got tested. Luckily, I was negative, but when you quarantine, it means you cannot leave your house for 14 days. You may as well have just homeschooled, and then if your child gets sick or if they get something, like, you're not necessarily testing. Now let's talk about the cost. If you're sending your child to a public school, it's going to be free, obviously. They'll provide everything. You might have to pay for some extra distant learning things, but it should be free. Now, the cost to your work, like, do you have to lose hours because your child has to be on this program at a certain time? I'm not sure, but the money that you have to put out, it could be free. They could also be providing free lunch and free breakfast. If your child is distant learning and they go to a private school, obviously that can be up to $30,000, $40,000 depending on how much money you're spending to send your child to a private school. Do you really want to spend $25,000 to send them to a distant learning private school? And I know some people might lose their slots or whatever, so that's something that you have to consider. On the flip side, with homeschooling, you can spend as much as you want. You don't have to spend a dime to homeschool. I keep telling people this. You can get everything free from the library. Contact the local school. They will give you supplies. They don't care. And we throw away so many books and materials every single day. They will help you. Online, there's tons of free programs. You don't have to spend any money. Now, if you are just kind of lazy or you prefer not to take the time to look through everything, okay, then you might have to spend money on a small curriculum or on some workbooks or something like that. You might even want to spend money to enroll your child into private classes or Kumon, or there may be teachers who are doing Zoom lessons for a certain amount of money. So there could be a cost associated with that. Also, though, at the same time, we don't know how much your child is actually going to learn when distant learning, and here this channel is about maximizing our child's potential. So if your child is distant learning and they just don't do well that year, are you going to have to pay for a tutor in the future? Are you going to have to pay for extra classes and extra help with them? Something else to consider. Final things I'm thinking about: homework on distant learning. You're going to have to help your child with homework, obviously, on a specific schedule and with projects, and you just might not have the time to do that like you normally would, especially if you are working from home. With homeschool, it's flexible. You're assigning whatever homework, if any, so it doesn't really matter. You can make your own schedule. The thing though that you might want to consider about homeschool is that if your child is in a special grade, like they're going into the 12th grade and there's going to be graduation, and you want them to participate in whatever possible graduation ceremony there will be at the end of the year, if you homeschool them, that probably won't be possible. You could possibly speak with the principal though, and maybe they'll let them participate. I doubt there's going to be any big gatherings. However, don't forget the possibility of just a homeschool graduation where you are in a group with other homeschoolers. Also remember though, if your child is in the 12th grade, another hack would be to enroll them in homeschooling until like January, and then maybe in January or February or March put them back into the public school system, and then those last 3 months of the year they do distant learning. Whichever option you choose, do make sure you run it by the homeschool people. You can ask them, hey, because of the pandemic, I would rather homeschool my child, but they're a 12th grader and they want to walk with their class. Is it okay if I homeschool them up until January and then enroll them back? And they'll be able to tell you yes or no, because you don't want to get to February or March and they say, oh no, for seniors, we don't enroll them out of the homeschooling program. And even if they do say that to you initially, push back a little bit, because it might not be the law. Look into the law. You may be able to enroll them at any time and they're just being difficult. So that's it. Those are the pros and the cons that I just thought about off of the top of my head from watching in homeschooling groups and in teaching groups and in parenting groups. Now, what would I do if I were in your situation? I would definitely at least start the year homeschooling my child, since you don't know what's going to happen. Register with your homeschool office. It's a very easy process, and even if it seems a little overwhelming, there are tons of homeschooling groups of people who are willing to help walk you through the process. Find a buddy, grab a bunch of workbooks, and just start like that. Just have them start working through workbooks while you figure out what you want to do. And again, remember, you can always put them back into distant learning. That's what I think. Let me know if you guys have any questions. All right.